Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for Sloanie Chats, where we bring you ideas made to matter from MIT Sloan alumni, faculty, and students. I am very excited to have with me today Stephanie Rowe from the Sloan Fellows class of 2014. Stephanie has led a transformative and fascinating career that has ultimately led her into developing and researching STEM gadgets for girls at what is referred to as MIT's Toy Lab. Before we get started, I have just a quick piece of housekeeping for you. In the right-hand column of your screen, if you're watching via Google+, you have a Q&A function. Please feel free to type in your questions for Stephanie at any point during our talk. We will be holding the questions until the end of the conversation, but please feel free to type in at any point. And with that, I will pass it over to Stephanie. Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Renee. I'm super excited to be here for the webinar, and thanks to everybody for joining the webinar. I thought that I would start to talk about my career journey, because I feel like my journey and my career has led me to where I am now. So in thinking about that, I thought I would start and talk through how I started my career, then move into a little bit about my time at MIT with Sloan Fellows, and then talk about a little bit about what I've learned about gender over the last 18 months, and ultimately then talk about my company, Jules. So starting out, I started as a computer programmer with a company called Anderson Consulting way back. It's now called Accenture. And I spent several years as a database administrator and a coder, and moving out of that into more of change management services, into the human side, ultimately moving into more business operations and doing things like process design. So I had this career really of deep tech, human side, and operations, really kind of pulling together over my 15+ years as an experienced business transformation person, having worked across multiple areas, working multiple continents, 23 companies, multiple industries, which was great. Consulting was perfect for me in that regard, and I loved my time there. That said, it wasn't without its challenges. And so my experience growing up as a woman in tech, and one of the only women in tech, really framed my perspective. And so I'll offer a few anecdotes just as kind of data points, because data points make you who you are, not as complaints or criticisms, but things like, I remember when I was probably maybe 2 years in and I was an analyst, sitting at my desk coding, and I was the only woman. And my manager came to me and said, hey, by the way, it was a Friday afternoon. He's like, by the way, you're going to be here by yourself this afternoon. We're taking, the rest of the team, we're taking the clients down to the strip clubs down in downtown Cleveland. And you're going to be here coding by yourself. Basically you have to stay here by yourself. Those are just, I was really young when I was like 23 or 24 years old. And so I had, so moving through the career, right? You just run into those things. I remember another time when I had been on a project for 8 months, and I was leaving, and I went to shake the client's hand, and the client's like, thank you for your work. You were really lovely to look at. And so those things just happen, right? And they frame you. So I guess my point is that I have felt my gender. It clearly didn't stop me. I was successful. I became, I got promoted to the senior executive level at Accenture, what was formerly known as the partner level. I got promoted right after they went public. So I just offer those as, ways to feel. So you just feel your gender, right? And so, and for, the women that I've spoken with over time, it's just a common thing. You kind of know that. And so ultimately I got recruited. It was time to do something different. I loved my time at Accenture. So I don't offer those points to say anything negative about Accenture. I loved my time there, all the way up to the point where I was a partner and there weren't many women. So I ended up starting to think about what was next for me. And in a weird twist of fate, I actually got recruited by a man named Kip Hawley to join the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, which I never in my wildest dreams thought I would do. If you said to me, hey, you're going to go be a federal government employee in Homeland Security, I wouldn't have believed it. But I did. He asked me to join, and so I did. And I was responsible for running all of TSA's identity management systems, which means anything that is a for any customer of TSA. That is what, that's kind of what I was responsible for. So for example, there's a program called Secure Flight that does name-based comparisons against the watch list. If you're flying in the US, actually in, out, or over the US, you have to put in your full name, date of birth, and gender, and that bounces against the watch list. It vets 2 million. When I was there, it vetted 2 million people a day. So that was one of the systems I was responsible for. And yet again, in Homeland Security, which was also a fantastic experience. I was there about 3.5 years. One of a few women. TSA tends to be very much filled with former law enforcement, former Secret Service, former, cops that walk the beat, and former military. So it was a really amazing experience there. But again, you could feel your gender also, especially in that environment. And on Kip Hawley's leadership team, I was one of a few of the operational women. There weren't that many. And so what's been interesting to me in my time at TSA is I actually got involved in something called design thinking while I was at TSA. So we decided to hire a design and innovation firm called IDEO, which some of you may know. And so through my time at TSA, I actually became immersed in design thinking, human-centered design, and just fell in love with it as another important tool set that executives and leaders need in their toolkit if they're going to actually design compelling products, services, and business models. So I just offer that because I think I find it really strange that I went to Homeland Security and learned this innovation tool set. It's kind of, I think, not intuitive. And so for me, I'm going to offer that because that becomes really important as I move forward in my career. So as I was there doing that, I started to become more and more involved in that and learning, getting really immersed in a deep appreciation for what that tool set offers. So I ends up leaving TSA and deciding to launch my own consulting company. And at the time, I really realized that analytical skills are really important. And I had very good analytical skills from my career, from being a coder, from having to optimize processes. And so I viewed myself as not creative, and I viewed myself as heavily analytical. And I realized in my work with IDEO that I was out of balance. And so I made a conscious effort coming out of TSA to increase my creativity and innovation skills. And I don't want to say I reduced my analytical, but I made a conscious effort to start to bring those into balance because I felt like I could run and operate, but I was having a harder time thinking about the future, innovating and creating new products and service offerings. So I consciously spent time to bring analytical and creative, or left-right brain, if you want to think of it that way, into balance. And so I got involved with the Stanford Design School, the Stanford D School, and I launched a design and innovation group in Washington, D.C. that now has about 3,000 people. And that was in an effort to kind of round out my skills. And so that was great. I was having a lot of success with my consulting company. And I decided that it was time to go back to school. So I applied to the MIT Sloan Fellows Program. And I did that, and I was super excited. It was like a dream come true to get accepted. And so I went off to MIT. And I largely chose to go to MIT because of its focus on innovation, cutting edge technology, and entrepreneurship. And I felt I wanted to be at the Mecca for those things. And I just felt like Cambridge and MIT was that place because as I was thinking about what do I want the next 20 years to be? So going into fellows, I've had a great career so far. I've loved it. The next 20 years, what can they be? I've mostly done software. I'd love to build a widget. I think MIT is a great place to go figure out what widgets I want to build. And so that was kind of my mindset going in, being very open to different things. And so I would laugh because I would say to people, I'm here at Sloan Fellows and I'm picking classes and I'm going to take nothing that's good for me. I'm only going to take things that are going to inspire me. And so, I mean, that's only partially true. I think all of it's good for you, but I was really coming there to find things that were going to change my frame, change my way of thinking, challenge me to think differently, to break the mold of how I thought. So I got to MIT and I took lots of awesome classes at Sloan. I branched out. I went into the Media Lab. I took a couple of classes at the Media Lab that I think were really interesting. I took something called Media Lab X with Mitch Resnick, Patty Mays, and it was Ethan Zuckerberg and Philip Schmidt. And it was all about reframing education. And the Media Lab is trying to say, all the stuff we do in the Media Lab, how can we actually reach out and bring that experience further out into the world? And so the work that Mitch, and especially Mitch and Patty, completely reframed how I think about education. I mean, totally. You ever have those moments where you think, oh my goodness, I thought about education in a very linear way, and we front load all of our learning. And she basically just kind of shattered that and said, what if we didn't do that? What if we actually had just-in-time learning and we only learned things at the moment when we needed them? And I had never really thought about that frame before. So that was an experience. I took another class at the Media Lab called Futurecraft with Amanda Parks, who was the lead designer, and Yoast. A lot of you probably know Yoast, the Media Lab. And it was Futurecraft. You could think of it as the intersection of design, venture, and sustainability. And so it was, as you imagine products, services, and ventures going forward, how do you create them through a sustainability lens? And they had us tear down products. We had to disassemble things. We had to do a full carbon footprint, a full life cycle assessment. And it changed my frame a lot in terms of thinking about not just the materials, but it's also how far those materials have to travel. And I remember the day when they talked about the difference between, what it takes to build a laptop versus what it takes to build a car. And which one of those things do you think has a worse carbon footprint to actually bring into production? And it was the laptop, and I was really surprised by that. I mean, forgetting the fuel for a second, but just to get it actually to create the product. So those were things that really changed my frame. I got heavily involved, since I love design, with Maria Yang in course 2, mechanical engineering, in MIT's ideation lab. And by the way, I got involved in these things coming from a place of passion. And so I was researching and looking. So for people that actually want to get involved with these types of things, it was me saying, what do I find interesting in the world? Where do I want to be involved? Where am I willing to donate time and contribute? And contribute? And so I reached out and just had conversations with these people and said, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's what I'm interested in. Can I help? Can we work together? What are you doing? And so that was where, with MIT's ideation lab, again, over in course 2, the course lab, the toy lab, David Wallace is also over there. And so it was out of my passion for design that I started working with Maria and talking to her, because she teaches young girls engineering, right? So she gets freshman girls that come in, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But and she has men and women in her group of graduate students over there. So that was really just being around them. I ended up, helping with classes. I ended up getting involved with design for DFA, Design for America, and Maria Yang is MIT's staff lead for that. So I ended up volunteering and doing different things and getting immersed in that. And it's interesting because following that passion is how I ended up finding my co-founder. So that is also, it's just interesting to me, being around that. And then I ultimately, the year after I graduated, then ended up helping Maria teach as a team instructor, Introduction to Design and Product Toy Design. So that further got me into the area that I wanted to be. And so my time at MIT was, immersing into education in the Media Lab, just into really, the other area was like soft circuitry with Ji Chi and other folks at the Media Lab, and really reframing electronics, the state of electronics, wearable tech, conductive thread, things, of Arduinos like lily pads or sewable electronics. Where is this tech going? How small is it becoming? It's becoming wearable. How does that change, how does that change what we can do with it? So it was really the exposure, I would say, for me at MIT, around my work at Sloan, or being in the Media Lab and being around course 2 and all these people trying to teach kids or these, freshmen and sophomores engineering. And in addition to that, my time at MIT was also with my amazing classmates in Sloan Fellows. And my year, we only had 16.95% women. And so that was really interesting to me, to hear stories from women around the world that weren't that different to mine. We had amazingly talented women from, Korea and from Chile, and they faced the same challenges. And it really didn't matter in terms of their gender, right? It really didn't matter if they were from America or Korea or Chile, like I said, or nor did it matter if they were technologists. We had somebody that worked, that was a display designer for Samsung, PhD in quantum chemistry, same issue. So we also had doctors and attorneys, women. And so I started to realize I was both comforted by the fact that they faced the same challenges, and then also horrified at the degree of the problem. So I've always been passionate because of my own experiences of having opportunities for women. And that was just amplified with my time and the 20 women I had in my class at MIT that some fellows I thought were really amazing, and hearing their stories. So all of these things, plus my design thinking, I think started to come together, because one of the cornerstones of design thinking is empathy and really understanding people, understanding where they are. So pulling that all together, I would say it started me thinking about what business do I want to build? Because as I mentioned, I was coming to MIT to figure out what thing I wanted to build. And I wanted to build a widget, and I wanted to align my passion with building a business. And so I was piecing these things together going through time. And MIT is a great place to follow your passion, because I have found that with the professors in the labs that I have reached out to, they have been very responsive, coming from a place of interest and a willingness to engage and put work in. So I encourage people, if they're interested in doing that, to do that. And so what I would like to do is now talk a little bit about what I've learned about gender. So as I started to immerse in this, I was iterating my way to thinking about, wow, what can I do for girls? Because we have this pipeline problem, and girls are falling out. Girls and women, by the way, are falling out all the way along. And so I started to, about 18 months ago, to really look at, I'm like, wow, how can I get more girls and women into technology and ultimately into more senior level positions, into them creating businesses like Pinterest and Facebook and others. And so I'm going to flip over now to slides, and I wanted to talk about some of the things that I've learned. And I'm going to start with some of my research around, and what I've done here is just kind of curated out of all the things that I've read and looked at, what I find the most interesting and compelling. And there's something called the STEM Index that was recently created in a partnership with US News and World Report and Raytheon. And I think on this particular slide, what is most compelling to me is that like 30 to 50%, and I've seen numbers that are even higher than this, of jobs over the next decade that are going to require STEM skills. So I found that really interesting. In addition to the increased amount of media coverage on this and businesses not being able to find the skills that they need. So moving on to a little bit more in this area, I think what I've probably found the most terrifying was the stats on this page that say having STEM skills can mean making it into the middle class or not. And the fact that only 17.4% of girls in high school are interested in STEM, that 85% of girls aren't interested, but yet 30 to 50% of jobs are going to be in STEM. And that really terrified me for what that meant for little girls. Like, I kind of intuitively knew that the numbers weren't good, but until I started looking at it, I didn't really realize like how bad it really was. So, and then kind of going a little bit further on this, looking at the stats of just jobs in general around STEM, and the fact that men are much more likely to go into STEM. And of course, that got me thinking about, well, why is this? And then, so I was really started from the place of, I want to solve this problem, and how might I go about doing that? So I started interviewing and researching and talking to people like toy designers in the IDEO Toy Lab, and saying, you know, I don't profess to be smarter than Hasbro or Mattel, but like, can you tell me why toys for girls are the way that they are? Because for, you know, let's say for like a decade, I would just get angry going into toy stores and looking at this polarization of pink and blue for, you know, dolls for girls and, you know, science kits for boys, and just the way that things exist. And so I came from a place of, why are things the way that they are? And so it took me back, it started me thinking about pink and blue. And so I'm just going to put this up for a second. I don't know if any of you know who this is, but I found this really interesting when I dug into this. This is actually a picture of Franklin Roosevelt when he was 2.5 years old back in 1885. And back in that time, kids, they didn't dress by gender. They dressed in largely white because you could bleach it. And also boys wore dresses because it was easier to change diapers and they didn't grow out of them as fast. So it wasn't until, so that's just kind of the way it was. And so like, when did we start to get into gender identification by color? And so it's interesting. You see, you read different things about this, but it wasn't clear at the beginning that pink was going to be for girls and blue was going to be for boys. There are several news articles, and even Time magazine printed a chart highlighting gender appropriate colors for girls and boys. And, you know, basically they advised that parents should dress boys in pink and girls in blue. And so there are, you know, going way back, it wasn't clear. And over time, basically you had these retailers, I think a couple things happened. You had retailers saying, wow, if we decide to sell people, you know, stuff for girls and boys, we can sell twice as, you know, we can sell twice as many for people that have a boy and a girl. So I think it was largely retailers that's starting to say, how can we segment this? And then ultimately it's grown into what we have now. What you see below, the picture of the little girl in the pink and the little boy in the blue, is a photographer that has studied this. And she's taken pictures, and really she's been fascinated by this almost complete polarization we have of pink and blue, you know, pink for girls and blue for boys. And so I was just trying to, what I wanted to do around gender was kind of come up with my own point of view on why things are the way they are, and really are boys and girls, are they that different? So that I was kind of studying that area. And so another couple of things I studied that I thought were really interesting is the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media has some very interesting studies. And so they have one that's called Gender Bias Without Borders that is really good. And I learned a lot by reading that. And through this, it became very clear to me media's immense role in shaping identity, to the point where I ended up spending quite a bit of time in partnership with a friend of mine that's marketing and a neuroscientist out of Harvard, understanding the neuroscience behind identity. And we ended up doing a presentation at South by Southwest last year that was on how can we innovate media and marketing, and consider how do we generate ads that don't cause harm? Because if you look at here, I was really horrified when I learned this. Basically, we sexualize in movies, we sexualize girls ages 13 to 39 equally. So what that means is they had the same kind of language was used about them. They equally showed as, you know, the same amount of skin. And so this got me thinking that if girls start to drop out of STEM at about age 12, so I'm targeting girls 8 to 12, and girls are dropping out and, you know, massively dropping out when they hit puberty about 12. And it got me thinking about, wow, that's interesting. Is there a tie here between that and media? And then another interesting fact out of this report, which I thought was super interesting overall, was in characters, 84% of STEM characters in media are men, and only 11.6 were women, which I also think we are, you know, you think about monkey see, monkey do, right? There's a reason that monkey see, monkey do is an expression. We mimic and we follow kind of what we see. And so this, you know, looking at the research from the Gina Davis Institute has really helped me frame my point of view around what needs to be done to start to change how women are perceived in business and in STEM. Another one I think that's really interesting is around parents. And so you can read the kind of the references here of, I read a lot of different things. These are kind of the highlights of some of the things that I read. And personal story, it was really interesting. I do consulting on the side to bootstrap my startup. And I was with a client, and I was actually teaching design thinking. And I had one of she was a client and a parent, and she had a 6-year-old boy and a 3-year-old daughter. And I was telling her about what I was doing. And she basically said that she basically was saying that, she goes, well, we raise our kids completely gender neutral. And she's like, we don't, we treat them the same, she's like, we just don't do that. We don't genderize at all. And I was just talking, and it was so interesting. She came in the next day and she's like, oh my God, Stephanie, she goes, I have a story for you. She goes, I walked in to my 3-year-old daughter's bedroom this morning to wake her up. like I have every day like I have every day of her life. I walked in and I said, "Good morning, gorgeous girl. How are you this morning?" And she said, "I couldn't believe I said it. I couldn't believe it came out of my mouth." She said, "I wouldn't dream of walking into my 6-year-old son's room and saying, 'Good morning, gorgeous boy. How are you?'" And so she's like, "I just wanted to share that with you," because she's like, "I didn't even realize I was doing it." And so, you know, I think the fact that parents generally let baby boys crawl farther away, they let them play farther away, that those things all come into play as people and girls and kids are shaping what they want to play with. And I think one of the most interesting things for me here was 61% of male college students studying STEM fields credit toys and games for getting them interested in STEM. And that's compared to 29% of women college students. So of the facts that people say of why they got interested in STEM for men, it is the majority of them say it's because of toys and games and what they played with. And then this was another interesting study. This was basically saying that teachers give better grades to boys on tests when they know they're boys. So they did a test where it was blind and it was anonymous. And the girls did better when the people didn't know the gender, and they did worse when people knew the gender, basically saying that teachers have less expectations or have fewer expectations from girls in math. So that was, I think, also interesting, getting to this unconscious bias. I guess for me, I learned how prevalent unconscious bias is. And I think one last thing that I found really interesting, I read this recently, and this is by a professor out of Stanford, and this is the brain, biology, and gender. And it basically says that we tend to think of gender as binary, you're male or you're female. And to an increasing degree, we are seeing through transgender and learning more about transgender that that's actually not the case. It's on a spectrum. And so that our biology, meaning our sex organs, develop independently than our brain. And so you can have a brain that thinks it's female and it develops as female, and it can develop male body parts. So the body ends up out of sync. And so what's interesting to me about that is, how then do you define gender? So if I'm going to stereotype you one way, is that because your brain is female and your sex organs are female or male? Like, so I just think that for me personally, shaping my point of view, all of these things have come together to give me a point of view on gender and what do we need to do to start to bring equality and get women more represented in STEM. So the things I just shared with you are just me framing my own point of view. I don't view myself, I'm not a researcher in this area. I'm doing research in service of my business to try to create a set of products and services that are going to delight little girls 8 to 12 to inspire them in STEM, and that also I'm going to shape the right products so that I can start to change society in the way that I want to change it. So I view myself as a social entrepreneur, but as a for-profit business, but socially trying to change the world. So I have to understand why things are. And so for me, again, this is framing my point of view. It doesn't matter to me so much what's nature and nurture, and I have my own point of view on that. But in terms of the products and services and offerings I'm developing for little girls, I can't unsocialize an 8-year-old girl or a 10-year-old girl, right? I have to meet her where she is. And so through human-centered design and design thinking, I spend a lot of time thinking about what is going to motivate and inspire little girls. And instead of trying to teach them STEM through things that are socialized to be boy, trying to change that frame to teach them or to bring STEM into what they're trying to do. And so I just think this, study by Robert Sapolsky, I guess is his name, at Stanford, was really continued to validate kind of what I'm feeling, what I was thinking before. And one of the things I think is super interesting here is our brain recognizes gender in 150 milliseconds. And our brains like to categorize things. And so that is, I think, super, whether you say you see gender or not, the fact of the matter is your brain is identifying somebody's gender and categorizing it before you're even conscious of it. So those are the things that have led me to founding my company, Jules, which is focused on girls and developing products for girls 8 to 12. And we are working at the intersection of arts, crafts, fashion, and electrical engineering, and trying to figure out what little girls want to do every day to inspire them to engage with our technology. So it's very much technology in service of them wanting to achieve what they're trying to do, whatever that might be. And so we're going to create a line of products that will grow with the girl and ultimately get into computer programming as well. So with that, I'm going to leave it there and turn it back to Renee
for
questions.
Great. Thank you so much. That was all really interesting, and we have a lot of really great questions. I'd also like to remind everybody that if you'd like to submit a question, please do so via Google Plus with the Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on MIT Sloan Alumni YouTube channel, and we'll also be sending the link out to you if you registered for the talk. So let's start off with, there's a lot of really great questions. I'm going to go with the first question from Anil Fool from MBA 2004. And Anil says, you have considerable experience and in diverse roles. With regard to your tenure in senior executive service, can you share some of the best business practices conducted by the federal government and how they may be applicable for entrepreneurs? Sorry about that.
Awesome. This is such a great question because you usually get the reverse, right? It's usually what can government learn from business? I find this a really interesting question. Yeah, my time in government was super interesting. I think that I would say, to answer this, I really believe that what the government does is because it has to think about all aspects of what it's doing and all impacts. And I'm not saying that it does a perfect job in doing that, but like when I was responsible for writing I was responsible for writing several regulations, and we had to think about the issue across many dimensions and think about it in detail. So I feel like the government does a good job and takes its time to actually try to understand and anticipate how the regulations or the systems or things that they're going to implement are going to impact across all kinds of, areas, everything from environmental impact to economic impact of, different groups. And so I feel like business doesn't always do that. Business is really trying to move very, very quickly and trying to make money, where I sometimes feel like if they would actually slow down and try to analyze and think about issues more holistically, they might get to better solutions. So I don't think there are many things, many examples to answer this, but I would say in my experience, the rigor that goes around writing a regulation and thinking through impacts, I think that you could potentially take some of those learnings and apply those to generating business models.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question is from Ben Baker, who's an MBA from 2000, and he asks, what are some of the things I can do to help my 3-year-old develop STEM abilities and interests? And the follow-up to this is, how can I get my support system on board with these initiatives as well?
Awesome. I love these questions. It's great. I think, it's so funny. You guys are going to think I'm obsessed on this topic. So I talk to a lot of people, and as I talk to women engineers, this is not a significant, or I should say a statistically significant test. This is just me doing research for my startup. Almost all the women that I talked to had some sort of figure in their life that built things with them. Women that went into technology-oriented things, building with your children or with your girls specifically really matters. And especially some sort of male figure seems to make a difference. Again, I don't know if that's, that's just anecdotal from my experience. It's been interesting to me as I've developed those patterns. So I think taking the time to build, and also using vocabulary. Vocabulary is really important. Having vocabulary is one of the main reasons girls become more insecure and they drop out, because boys are gaining vocabulary from the things that they're playing with. So going back to Maria Yang in course 2, she said to me, Stephanie, I know you want to build skills. She goes, but I'm telling you, language is very, very important, because it's one of the main reasons girls go from slightly insecure to more insecure and potentially drop out, is because they get behind in curriculum day one in mechanical because they don't have vocabulary. So I would say build and focus on vocabulary.
Great, thank you. And then Tom, I apologize, I'm not going to get your last name correct, but Tom Kalachek from the Sloan Fellows 1996 asked if you have some thoughts on strategies to engage the broader community to support computational thinking initiatives.
I think overall, just at a macro level, at a higher level, I think the biggest thing that needs to change is we need to broaden how we're thinking about applying engineering and computer science or whatever area of STEM you're talking about. We really think about applying those again through things that tend to be socialized as male. So most of the I've spent time with, I don't know, more than 30 girls, and they all want to build, but they generally don't want to build robots. I was talking to this one girl, she's really into, she wants to be a filmmaker, and she wants to build something that she can put her camera on that can move the camera around so that she doesn't have to move the camera. I would argue that's a robot, but that's a very different context for applying that. And what I've learned is that largely girls want the context around what you want them to do, where generally, and I'm generalizing, generally boys will build just to build. Girls want context. You can add context around saying, what are you interested in and why are you doing it? Or you can add context. If you guys have heard of Goldie Blocks, it's a construction kit for girls. They've added context by adding story. So I think it's more about understanding the context and applying the technology to things that girls find more interesting. If we asked little boys to learn electrical engineering by making electronic bracelets, I don't know how interested they would be in that. And I feel like we largely ask girls to do that and applying it to things that we socialize them to not find as interesting.
You know, that's a funny story because Tom also wrote in a quick comment, which is a quick story that in his extended learning opportunities time, they have a young woman who is on the lower end of proficiency for the 7th grade. She is currently working on a next generation wearable for her dog so that the coyote won't eat him. So, so case in point. All right. So Leslie McCafferty asks, I work in a K through 12 school system. Are you presenting on this environment yet? Our schools do hour of code, etc., but nothing targeted specifically to girls.
Could you say, what was the first part of that? I missed the first part of the
are you presenting in a K through 12 environment yet?
No, we are. So basically, we're going to be a consumer product. I mean, we may end up testing and trying to do like after school programs, but our intent for our products and services are basically our consumers. So they would be, moms, dads, and girls buying a set of, physical and digital products and an experience. So, I mean, we may end up going to schools, but right now we believe we can have broader impact by going consumer product.
Great. All right. Our next question, actually, several people wrote in to ask about what toys, since we're going into the holiday season, are there any toys on the market that you would recommend now? And then if you can talk whatever, I know some of the stuff you're working on is still sensitive. So what can you tell us about the gadgets that you're developing?
Yep. So I think age here really matters. And it also, what I have found is, again, we're targeting 8 to 12. So I think a couple things matter. It depends on how much exposure that girl has. So there are, I don't know if you guys know, there's a product called Ruminate, which is a construction toy. It's basically, imagine you're building a dollhouse. It's a construction set to build dollhouses, but it makes the girl also the architect and the electrical engineer, and you can wire that up. So it comes with switches, it comes with lights, it comes with motors, and you snap pieces together. So meaning you can add elevators. You can add elevators to your house. You can add ceiling fans. You can make it a washing machine. You can make a playground if you want. So I think Ruminate is an interesting toy. There's also Goldie Blocks, but Goldie Blocks is younger. Goldie Blocks is going to be, I'd say 4 years old to probably going to age out of that by 6 or 7, maybe up to 8. Ruminate tends to start a little bit older. I would say Ruminate would be more probably 5, 6, 7, 8. 9 years old. So I think those are both really, really good tools. There's this space is emerging. I believe that you're going to see a massive boom, and I call it, girls tech, like a new frontier of girls technology. And so there aren't that many products out there. They're starting to become more and more. So some of the ones, like there's one called Jewelbots, which is basically, they're trying to reimagine the friendship bracelet. And it has LEDs, and the girl can code it. It will light up when she's around her friends. So I think they need to work on their aesthetic a little bit, but I think the idea of it is really interesting. And so for us, for Jules, I can't say too much about it because we haven't filed some of the stuff we need to file. All that I can say is that if you look at so much of what we buy for girls is black box technology, and it's largely, duct tape to make your purse, or make your bracelet, or it's things like that. And so we will be in that. So if you bought a kit now, it's 100% crafting. Our kits will be, our products will be 50% crafting, 50% tech. You can think about it from that perspective.
Great, thank you. So moving back to, you spoke a little bit about getting involved with some of the different research labs on campus, and that it was really your passion that drove you to do that. So Sophie Schmidt from the MBA class of 2013 asked, how can MIT Sloan alumni get more involved in projects at the Media Lab and other research centers? So would you mind elaborating on that process a little bit?
Totally. I mean, what I have found in my experience is, MIT people are largely driven by passion, and interest. What are they interested in? And they're really willing to collaborate and share. My experience across campus, and I have really actively worked to get involved in, the Media Lab course 2, course 6 by volunteering. So I would say, what are you really interested in? Understanding that, mapping that into MIT. And so if you're interested in artificial intelligence, as an example, who in CSAIL, or robotics, who in CSAIL or who in the Media Lab is doing robotics? Or if you're interested in, like personal robotics as a group in the MIT Media Lab. Like what I did was I said, I'm fascinated by the Media Lab. I literally went into the Media Lab's website. I understood there are 20, at least at the time I did my research, there were 25 different groups in the Media Lab, understood what each of them what they were trying to do as part of their lab. Where was I interested in contacting those people? And I think that if you do that homework and it's really hard if you don't know what you're looking for, but if you have areas of interest, it doesn't even have to be one. If you have 3 or 4, researching them, saying, wow, these people are doing interesting work. But I think that when you reach into those labs, you have to be willing to explain why you're there and what benefit those people are going to get by engaging with you. And you have to be willing to jump in and do the work and offer your time and help. And where there's a good match, I have personally found people to be extremely receptive, like Maria Yang. I just said, look, I'm super interested in design. You have this ideation lab here. Like, I would love to work with you. I don't know what that means. I don't even know how I can contribute, but here's what, I'm really interested in girls in STEM. How can we have conversations about that? And she was fantastic. And it just went from there.
Wonderful. That's what we like to hear. You have to knock on doors. All right. So Erwin Julius asks, what different approaches do you suggest on applying design thinking at startups and larger companies?
Say the first part one more time.
What different approaches do you suggest on applying design thinking at startups and larger companies?
Yep. Awesome. So this is such an interesting question. I think if you're doing it for a larger company, I think larger companies, if you're trying to do a culture change, so I'm going to answer the question in the context of the organization might not do that today and it needs to start to do that. I think that getting a core group of people either up to speed on the concepts of design thinking and innovation, or bringing those people in, whether that's hiring them or bringing in some consultants to help. I think starting with a level of education and language. I think education and language is really important. And then having a problem to solve. I think there's nothing like showing results. So when we did this at TSA, we actually got a group of people together and we started to show small wins on what we were designing and what was different. So I think for large companies, I would take those steps, but I would start with taking a specific business problem, whether that's internal or external, you can apply the principles the same, and getting people that are excited about it. And I would say when you're in large organizations, you probably already have people in your organization that are interested in this topic. So finding them. So I do a little bit of work now with Capital One, and they already have people before they even started training that are interested in that topic. So where in your organization, where are those people, trying to tap into them, because they're already doing it. They want to do it. They have the inherent motivation, and you don't have to train them. So find them, find something tactical to do. Now for startups, I think it's a little bit different because you don't have all the same infrastructure and level of support that a large organization has. So for startups, I think it is very much like, I'll answer in the context of, for me and Jules, we didn't have a technology. We are absolutely girl-led and developed. We're a design-led company. And so we are starting with solving that problem. So there are startups that, as we know around MIT, which is equally valid, is to say, we've got a tech and I've got to find a solution for this tech. And so I think that's a slightly different process. Where in either case, though, I think you have to really understand what problem you're solving. So I think design thinking can help you make sure that you are solving the right problem. And I think for startups, it is absolutely about identifying a set of customers. And for startups, I think because you're so short on resources, I think it's extreme users. There's a concept in design thinking called extreme users. So you want to find the people that are feeling your pain in an extreme way. So as an example, what that means for little girls is I want to spend time with little girls that are crazy into STEM, that love STEM, that are like, view themselves as STEM girls. I also want to spend time with girls that wouldn't want to engage in technology to save their life. They don't care about it. They're not interested. And so what can I can learn from both of those extremes. And so I think from startups, because the needs are magnified in the extreme situation. So for startups, I think going to the extremes is really helpful.
Great. And we have so many great questions, but only time for one more. So our final question is going to come from Jill Christians, who is MS from 1994. And Jill asks, for those of us former engineers who used our MIT Sloan MBA to leave engineering, how do we effectively role model girls' decisions to go into STEM disciplines and stay there, or at least to value the skill set it provides in other fields?
Yeah, I think that you can actually talk about, how you got. So if you've moved out of that and gotten into Sloan, and advance in your career, I think you can talk about how did you use those skills? Like, why did you go into it? How do you solve problems? And I think that having problem-solving skills, whether that's around coding or engineering and building, I think those translate not only into your career, they also translate into your life. And so maybe you can build the house that you want, or maybe you can make a contraption for your dog when your dog got injured, or you can fix your car. So I think that there's not only the career application of that in terms of choices and opening up, but there's also how you apply those things in your personal life and the amount of choice that gives you. So I think you can role model and say, what I would say to people in this case, like for me, I left programming a while ago. I still use those problem solving skills, and I forget how I've built those skills, and I forget the path that I took. So I think helps sometimes walking them through and saying that I value those skills. I still use those skills today. I've now changed a little bit how I apply them. And just standing up and being who you are and saying, I think there's huge value in just saying, yeah, I'm technical. And if that's geeky, that's great. Like wave your geek flag, that's awesome. And I think one of the most disturbing things I saw was, when I was in computer science in college, I think I had mentioned I did my hair and my makeup, and I wore my sorority letters walking into CS class, and they'd be like, who are you? With education classes down the hall. And I was interviewing a senior, and she was graduating double major mathematics and computer science. And this was a year ago. So not a long time ago, a year ago. And she said to me, she's like, you can't be pretty and be a programmer. And this is at MIT. She goes, I have my male classmates saying to me, you can either be a good coder or you can be attractive. You don't get to do both. And so that was 2014. And so I think just being yourself as a role model and saying, I look like this, and I live my life and I'm also technical and have been technical, that is huge in a society that tells girls they have to choose between being a good coder and being attractive.
That is a fantastic note to end on. Stephanie, thank you so much for your amazing talk today. We've really enjoyed having you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And for everybody who's watching today, if you've registered for today's chat, you will receive a follow-up email where we'll ask you to complete a quick survey to give us your feedback on this chat and future events to make them as applicable as possible for all of you out there. And also, we will be sending the link for the recording, which, as I stated earlier, will also be on the MIT Sloan Alumni YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to MIT Sloan's Office of External Relations, and we look forward to chatting with you next time. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you, Renee.